Hello and a big welcome to Research Live. Today we're pleased to have Professor Julia Buckingham. And welcome to Research Live, Professor Buckingham. What would you then say to any early career academic who aspires to become a VC in the future?
You need to develop a broad portfolio because leading a university is quite a broad-based role. I can tell you no 2 days are ever the same. So it is it's fascinating, it's a wonderful job, it's an immense privilege to be leading this university. I think you have to develop a broad portfolio, you have to develop your leadership skills, you have to develop your academic CV. You will not be promoted unless you've got good research and good teaching, so you must not lose the focus on that. But you mustn't do it exclusively. You must get outside and involve yourself in your professional bodies and other things you're asked to do. So, if you're rung up by a research council, can you referee this grant? The answer is yes, please. Not I'm too busy. You find the time to do it. Then you do a few of those and you get the invitation to sit on the research panel. And then it's yes, please, I want to do it. It's not no, thank you. Within reason, we can't all do everything. But it is beginning to get yourself involved in that external environment, beginning then to influence the direction of travel, not just internally but externally, and also making those very, very important networks. And those are hugely important. And I think actually because of the way that research works now, it's much more difficult for young people to develop those networks. When I was young, the professional bodies, I belonged to two main ones, the British Pharmacological Society and the Society for Endocrinology, both of which I've been president on, which has been great. They used to meet monthly or bi-monthly when I was young. They were very small meetings. Universities were smaller places. They were much less worried about the commercial aspects of life. So we just used to beetle around to different people's universities. It didn't cost anything other than going there. And people gave presentations, and all the senior professors across the country were there. There weren't so many of them then, of course, but they were all there. And so you got to know a lot of people outside of your own university. And your own research group was very, very small. I mean, my prof had 2 postdocs and 3 PhD students, so it was quite a small research group. These days research groups are much, much bigger. So people, when they go to meetings, they tend to stay in their research group and they're actually quite insular. Whereas when I went, it was an opportunity to meet the PhD students and postdocs from all across the country. And these people, of course, many of them have continued in academia, they've grown up in academia, and they're in quite senior positions around the country now. So I've got a network of people around the country and indeed across the world that I have got to know through those activities. And I think younger people now have got to think of different ways by which they can network with their research colleagues and indeed their teaching colleagues to build those networks and get to know people. And then you learn, of course, about what's going on in other places. You learn about good practice in other places. You can bring it back into your own area of work. And of course you build your research groups, you build your collaborations, so that when you read a paper by one of your colleagues, you can pick up the phone and say, great paper, wonder if we could talk, perhaps we could do this together. And then you get the collaborations going.
How could people learn from your experience?
Well, by coming and talking to me is probably the best way to learn from my experience, and I'm not sure that my experience is perfect. But I have had a very interesting career in university. I've done a lot of different things. I've taken the opportunity to work in industry, and I've always taken the opportunity to be as outward-facing as I possibly can be, and to engage with the sector and indeed beyond the sector as much as I possibly can. And I think that's very, very important. It's very easy to be inward-looking when you're really, really entrenched in your research, and that's all that matters. But actually it's very important to be outward-looking and aware of what's going on in the outside world and contributing to it.
Talking about your career in the industry, I think recently we had an informal survey with a number of our colleagues, and although some of them expressed their interest of going into the industry, we felt a slight hesitation of, what about if I go and the door shuts and I'm not able to come back? Would you have anything to say to this?
Well, I think it's a difficult decision, and I think it depends at what stage in your career you do it. I went to industry very early in my career, immediately after I left university, and that was what I wanted to do. But on reflection, I think I was probably very naive, and I didn't understand very much about the way in which I went to the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't understand very much about the way in which it worked. I genuinely thought I was going to do research, which I was, but of course it was very focused, because any industry is about making a product and getting that product to market. And I think as a scientist in industry, and certainly in the pharmaceutical industry, there are many more opportunities now than there were when I was young to do research. But once that research has not got the potential to lead to a product, that program can be closed down very, very quickly. And if you're like me and you're absolutely passionate about whatever it is you're working on, that's very difficult, and I would find that extremely difficult to handle. So I do think you need, I think internships are brilliant actually, because people can then dip in and experience what it's like. But I think you've got to have that right mindset to go into industry. And if you haven't got that right mindset, I suspect that you probably wouldn't be very happy. And you need a slightly different mindset in academia. But that said, you do sometimes need to be prepared to change track slightly in academia, because the way in which funding works now in the UK, there is much more strategic funding, and you have to align your grant applications, as you will know only too well, to the strategic objectives of the funder. So it's no use having a wonderful idea and writing an absolutely brilliant grant application if it actually doesn't address the key strategic area that your funder wants to address, because you'll get a nice letter back saying thank you but no thank you, and that's an awful lot of work down the drain. So you do have to be strategic, but if you're reasonably smart, you can move your research and keep your passions at the same time. But I think it's horses for courses, and I think people have got to make those decisions. Where I have seen it go badly wrong is when people make the move from academia into industry at a later stage in their career. And again, I suspect it's lack of understanding of what industry is about, and familiarity with an academic environment. It's also difficult for people coming the other way, because for people working in a research career in industry, they aren't spending their life applying for grants. The industry is funding what they're doing. You come into a university environment, it is your responsibility to write that grant application to get your funding. The university doesn't have shed loads of money, unfortunately, to invest in research projects. You have to go outside and get that funding. And if people who spent their life in industry haven't necessarily got the skill of writing grants, and grant writing to a certain extent is marketing. You've got to sell your idea with rigorous evidence, of course, to convince a grant awarding panel who will be quite mixed in their expertise. They're not necessarily experts in your field of study. And we talked earlier about public engagement and how different it is explaining your work to an uninformed audience as opposed to talking to an expert audience. It's the same writing a grant application. You are selling your idea to a slightly more expert area, but not a broad expert area. So to give you an example, I chair the doctoral training panel in Northern Ireland. We cover everything from medicine and veterinary medicine through to allied health and social work. Now, I'm a pharmacologist stroke endocrinologist. I can't possibly have expertise right across that area. But you have to look at the science in those programs and take a judgment. So the people writing those applications have to write it in a language that someone who is a scientist or a medic can understand right across the piece. It's a different skill, and I think people coming from industry actually find that very difficult. So they are difficult decisions. I think they're very difficult decisions, and I think dipping your toe in with an internship both ways is actually a very good idea. Partnering is probably a better idea.
So the whole thing is, for instance, with the knowledge transfer leave scheme that we have set up here at Brunel, that would allow academics to go in secondment, in effect, into industry or other stakeholders. Do you think that would be a really good move?
I think it's a really good move in many regards. I mean, it certainly allows people to test out the water, and that's critically important. But the research that we do in this university is largely applied, and it's largely tailored to work with industry. And actually, those sort of partnerships are critical to taking our partnership forward with industry, because we do need academics who understand the language of industry, and we need people from industry who understand the language of academics. And I think you only really acquire that language. It would be like me trying to learn Italian. I think the only way I could possibly do it would be to go to Italy for a long time, which sounds a very good idea to me. But it's exactly the same with working with industry. You need to understand the language, and it's having that common language. It's the same with interdisciplinary research. Getting mathematicians to talk to biologists or biologists to talk to mathematicians is very difficult because they speak different languages. And the only way, I think in my experience, I've seen it work, is when you put the two together and you actually make them talk. And you give them a carrot along the way to encourage them to talk.
Yes.
Thank you very much. There you go. Useful, very useful tips. I've made copious notes here. I hope you do as and when you watch this video. And please don't forget to leave your comments or share your experience with us on the website. Thank you very much for watching Research Live, and see you again very soon.